Do you know that same way that bankers manage money and footballers actually play football, statisticians and researchers, they handle data, or you may want to call it variables. Now, an understanding of how these data or variables are measured is very, very critical to understanding statistics and a successful research adventure. Today, I'm going to share with you on the topic variables and their scales of measurement. My name is Dr. Felix Ayodele Oyeleye. Now, let's have a definition of what a variable is. Now, a variable is essentially a characteristic or a condition of the subject of a population, the subject within a population. And these are characteristics or conditions that can take different value. So essentially in research, what we do is that we look at the relationship between variables within a given population. And we want to understand how these variables interact or how they affect each other. So, but of course, before we can study a population, we essentially take sample from that population. The reason we take sample is because many a times a population will be so large that we cannot study the entire subject of that population or the individual entity within that population. Or maybe the resources may not even be there to understudy every entity within that population. So we essentially take sample. And the reason we take this sample is that we can understudy the sample, and the result we have obtained from that sample, we can use that to answer certain questions about the population. So we end up having what we call a population sample circle. So you have a population of interest, and from that same population, you obtain a sample, you selected a sample, and then you subjected the sample to a particular research study. And the findings you have obtained from that study, you generalize the finding to the entire population. But it's important to understand that variables are of different types. Essentially, we can look at variables from two broad categories. Number one, we have the discrete variables, and also we could have the continuous variable. The discrete variables are variables that take absolute value, like number of individual, specific number of item. That is discrete in nature. Class size, these are indivisible categories. While the continuous variables are variables that can take value between two whole numbers. Like when you talk about the height of an individual, somebody can be 5.4, 5.6, 6.7, as the case may be. So when you have values, when you have variables that can be measured maybe to the nearest minute, nearest seconds, nearest decimal fraction, we refer to them as continuous variable. Now, it's important to now understand how are these variables measured. Because at the beginning, as a researcher, you want to look at the relationship of these variables. Then you took information about the variables, but you must understand that these variables can be measured in different categories. And these are what we refer to as the scale of measurement. Basically, we have four measurement scale of variables. We have the nominal scale, we have the ordinal scale, we have the interval scale, and the ratio scale. The nominal scale is an order set of category. It's essentially describe identity and doesn't really talk about direction. Like when you talk about the name of an individual, the gender, or complexion, these are nominal in nature. And of course, we also have the ordinal scale of measurements, which talks essentially about ranking, where variables are ranked like other set of categories, like the grade of students, level of performance, or rank. We describe them as ordinal scale of measurement. How about the interval scale of measurement? Now, this is an order series of equal size categories, okay, like a form of scaling. But one thing is very unique with the interval scale of measurement. The 0 point is located arbitrarily on an interval scale. An example is our Fahrenheit scale. And of course, we have this ratio scale of measurement, which of course is similar, though it's similar to interval scale, but the 0 point is non-arbitrary. It's non-arbitrary in establishing, okay? So, having mentioned this, it's important to understand that when we study variables, we can study variables in different types of research study. Either we call it a correlational study or an experimental study. Now, when we study the relationship between two variables, by mere observing the variable without any form of intervention, we describe it as a correlational study. But when we make intervention to one variable, we describe it as an experimental kind of study. So, the correlational study, the goal is to determine whether there's a relationship between these two variables, and we want to describe the relationship. But one thing is unique to correlational type of study of variable is that they simply observe the two variables as they exist naturally. Well, an example is that of the wake-up time and the academic performance of students. You can look at the wake-up time of a set of students and look at their academic performance. So, in other words, you are not making any intervention, you are just observing. That's a correlational study. While on the other hand, we have the experimental study. Now, the goal of an experimental study is to demonstrate causal and effect relationship between two variables. Now, in other words, you want to change the value of one variable and see the impact it will have on the second variable. Now, one variable is considered manipulated and the other is considered observed for effect. So, in experimental study, a second variable is observed after you have measured it, while you compare to see if there's a difference between the treatment condition. So, in experimental study, we talk of the manipulated variable, we talk of the control variable. Okay, so the manipulated variable is called the independent variable, while the observed variable is our dependent variable. So we can have an example like in the case of obtaining two samples from a population of third grade students. The first sample, we taught them using an approach, called it method A, while the second sample of students obtained from that population, we taught them with another method, call it method B. And then we want to compare the results, the performance of these students. So we describe this as a form of experimental study. And of course, we also have what we call the quasi-experimental. In quasi-experimental, we don't use manipulation. Variables are not necessarily manipulated, but there are certain natural occurrences or natural events around these two variables that actually inform the changes we are going to observe in these two variables. This is what we describe as quasi-experimental variable. So that is the much we are going to take today in research and statistics. Please don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll see you again in my next video. Thanks for listening.